Yo, what's up guys, I'm Dunmere, I'm a top 100 Overwatch player and rank 3 Supervive player, and here I have a guide for you guys for Ghost. I have over a year and a half of playtesting already with 400 hours put into the game, so here you guys go.
Let's start with Ghost's abilities. Ghost's primary fire is a rapid firing assault rifle. Though this weapon doesn't actually use ammo, it imitates it by requiring a short reload type time after firing 30 rounds or stopping shooting. During each burst of his gun, the first 10 shots decay in damage until they reach half damage, staying there for the remaining 20 shots or until you stop shooting. For Ghost's secondary fire, he has a knockback sticky grenade. Toss out a grenade that sticks to enemies in terrain, before exploding after a short delay to damage and knock enemies back. If enemies are knocked back into an obstacle, they will also be stunned. Enemies caught in this knockback explosion will also be dazed, which increases the damage of Ghost's primary fire on them. Knocking back an enemy reduces the cooldown of this ability. Ghost's E ability is a cleaving laser cannon. Charge up a laser that then blasts out a beam that cleaves through enemies and terrain. Hitting enemies with this ability reduces the cooldown for each hit. And in addition, this ability deals an extra 20% damage against dazed targets. For Ghost's mobility, he has a combat slide. Hold the ability to slide farther, or release it earlier to get a cooldown reduction depending on time held. Get a knock on an enemy as Ghost, and you'll also get a full cooldown recovery of this dash. Ghost's ultimate is a location targeted AoE damage. Call out a beam of energy that deals a burst of damage in a circle around it, dealing significantly increased damage at the center. After the beam ends, it leaves behind a fire zone that deals additional damage over time and slows enemies. With the abilities covered, let's discuss Ghost's strengths and weaknesses, starting with the strengths. Ghost is a character with powerful strengths in a wide variety of categories, which match up to his character fantasy of an assault gorilla. So to get right to them, Ghost's first core strength is his excellent damage capability. Not only does he have the ability to output huge chunks of damage, but he's quite flexible in how he can do it. He is capable of dealing damage from shocking range with his laser cannon, which also isn't limited by cover, all while being capable of fragging both single enemies with his primary damage and his ultimate, but also being capable of applying huge AoE kill potential with his grenade. There isn't really a situation where Ghost will struggle inherently in terms of damage capability. While characters with this sort of design tend to be selfish characters that don't add much to a team, Ghost has stellar crowd control capabilities as his second core strength, which allows him to easily set up his team for kills. Specifically, his nade is genuinely oppressive, even amongst the other CC abilities of which every character has one. This is because his nade offers both knockback and stun potential, while being on a very short cooldown that includes the ability to get full resets depending on how many enemies it hits. And honestly, the AoE cone that it applies when landed on an obstacle is absolutely massive. Yet in addition to all of this, Ghost's mobility is excellent in both the distance he can cover with it and his flexibility, making it his third core strength. Like some of the other characters in the cast, his dash offers the ability to cancel early to reduce the cooldown. While this offers excellent flexibility to it, that permits small dodges and spacing adjustments. The way it currently works with his momentum allows him to hit a short dash with the jump and get a huge distance. While this may be nerfed over time, it still doesn't mean Ghost's mobility will become bad, as not only would he still have the flexibility, but he also still have the cooldown resets on knocking an enemy. Unless of course they remove that too, but likely that won't happen. For substantial weaknesses though, Ghost honestly doesn't have many. However, his most notable weakness is that some of his value is conditional. For his primary fire, in circumstances like if he misses his nade or is in an open area where he needs to land a direct shot on an enemy, he can struggle to daze an enemy, meaning his damage output will be significantly lower. And also, since the nade needs something to hit to activate, if he's standing in an open area, he'll need to land a skill shot to knock an enemy off of him, as there won't be an obstacle for him to get the cone blast from his nade. These together can put him in an awkward position where his value falls significantly. So with the strengths and weaknesses over, let's talk about how to actually play Ghost. Ghost plays best as a ranged spammer and soft flanker, first chunking down enemies before they can even threaten him, and then moving on to soft flanks where he can burn his enemies with huge AoE grenade stuns and powerful ults to cut off their escapes. All the while, keeping right out of the enemy's grasp, kiting right at the edge of his threat range where he can bully his prey. With that as a general overview, let's talk about the specifics of his abilities. To use Ghost's primary fire best, you want to pay attention to two things mainly: the deteriorating damage he has per each of the first 10 bullets, and the daze status of the enemy. As mentioned, his first 10 bullets per burst reduce steadily in damage down to 50% where they then remain. So his first 10 bullets are the most valuable, and the other 20 are much less important. While it can be okay to use some of the remaining 20 bullets, Ghost will dramatically lose raw damage output, and therefore reduce his likelihood of winning a direct DPS trade the more he holds down his bursts. And since he slows his own movement a lot while shooting, you definitely are likely to take damage during this. Combo this with the temporary time frame enemies are dazed, and his primary fire is best in mindfully used bursts, rather than held down full sprays. You also remove your movement penalty when reloading, as they call it, or resetting the burst, which doesn't really take that long. So you'll get a lot of value of thinking about how you can take advantage of enemy attacks to both dodge them and use the time to get your gun reloaded. Though, if an enemy is dazed, the time frame isn't reliably that long to look for reloads, so just spam them. As for Ghost's grenade, this is his most powerful ability. So when not at absolute max range, it's really what his entire value source hinges on. Hit a knockback and you get dazes that you can shoot. Don't, and your damage is much worse. Even more so, you have the potential to get full team stuns with the nade, so you really want to prioritize chunking enemies with it. Since the knockback goes straight out from the blast, you also need to think about how you can position it to secure stuns with it, or how the knockback will force enemies into awkward positions, such as over the abyss or into your team where they don't want to be there. But equally, you can sometimes help an enemy if you're not careful. In addition to all this, the grenade also guides Ghost positioning, as he can easily throw it behind him and use the blast to completely negate the aggro of a diver. So when you have it, you should position with a specific terrain you want to kite back to, and toss the nade at that terrain as you dash or walk back into it. Even better if it will allow you to position the grenade so it will knock back the diver into a wall for a stun. Also think about the cooldown reduction you're getting with this too, as hitting 2 or 3 people depending on the rank of the ability will fully or nearly fully restore the nade for another use. As for Ghost Laser, it's not where most of his value will come from, but it's still excellent for poking enemies when in the early phases of a fight or before a fight. Especially in a sweaty in circle where nobody wants to make the first move, you'll slowly be burning down the enemy health and resources to give yourself a much easier fight later on. Regardless, don't prioritize your positioning for this ability, as your grenade and primary fire a much higher raw value. But if you stun a group of enemies from range, feel free to cleave them with the laser to get the bonus damage. Also, the laser knocks you back while you use it in the air, and also knocks back enemies it hits a bit. So if an enemy is chasing you, you can jump and pop it to force some extra distance. For Ghost Mobility Slide, it generally operates like other dashes, but since it refunds a cooldown depending on how long you hold it, you can get insane value from min-maxing it. So really think exactly how far you need to go when holding it. However, as mentioned before, it currently also allows Ghost to maintain a lot of momentum when jumping right after a short slide. So until or if they patch this, you should use this whenever looking for a bunch of distance. You'll get a cooldown around a third of what it'd normally be, so it's extremely valuable. While it isn't currently incredibly useful, Ghost does still get resets on it for knocking an enemy. But this does require you actually get the final blow rather than an ally. So assuming the cooldown is increased or they reduce a short slide jump distance, it'll become more and more important to think about this, as it can be used to dive onto a dazed and stunned target to finish them and then slide out. You just have to be very careful to actually secure the final blow, or you'll be left waiting to get the full cooldown back. Moving on to Ghost's ultimate, it is a bit strange. It can deal quite a solid chunk of damage but has a very small AoE on it, so you're looking really to predict the enemy positioning with it, such as if you land a stun and the enemy is likely to kite to a very specific location after. It does take a bit of time to land once cast, so you really have to get good at predictions, especially since hitting it directly on an enemy deals 50% extra damage. Because of the inconsistency on it, it sometimes offers the best value just for its post-use slowing field. So if enemies only have one way they can realistically kite to, pop the ult behind them and slow them as they try to escape. Now that we have the specifics covered, let's talk about how to apply this into a full playstyle. Ghost's gameplay loop revolves around landing a grenade knockback stun on something, as it either will entirely win a fight for his team, or will set him up with the extra damage to fry them down. So to do so, Ghost plays best to take soft flanks on the enemy team. He doesn't have to go on super hard flanks, as he only needs to get partial sightlines on the enemy, where he is close enough to land his grenade. This is because the grenade's explosion will be able to hit the areas he can't see directly. Regardless, the soft flanks allow him to get close enough to the enemy, so he isn't being on range by a longer range character like Shrike or Huntress, but keep him safe enough that he can toss his grenade off cooldown. Otherwise, he might need to save his grenade for defensive purposes if he went on too aggressive of a flank. These flanks though are best initiated once a teamfight truly is beginning. Before this, he should just look to spam enemies down with his laser. The more he hits with it, the more cooldown reduction he'll get on it, and the faster he can keep burning them down. So once the fight actually does start, you'll then need to look for a soft flank with him. There, you're simply looking to secure a good grenade. Whether you're contested by 1 or 2 enemies, or if nobody contests you at all and you have free sightlines on a stacked up group. If you're contested by 1 enemy or a duo, you want to secure a minor advantage by chunking the enemy through the walls with his laser. While this isn't absolutely necessary, it definitely helps to apply some pressure, especially if the contest turns into a stalemate. From there, you should just fish for a good grenade. While it's best to land it on a wall to get more reliable knockback duration for planned stuns and the extra daze duration, it's still okay to aim for a direct stun if the enemy is positioning too far from obstacles. Regardless, you don't really want to engage until you land one, as your base damage is just subpar comparably. Yet when you do, you should aggro dash onto it and fry the enemy with your primary. If the enemy is quite tanky or could still outfrag you, you should be more cautious. But you should still look to output a bit of extra primary fire damage before backing things up and slowing things down for round 2. If you could aim to knock the enemy towards you while aiming for a stun also, you can sometimes even bypass the need for you to dash in the first place at all, and just save it to chase in case you get enough damage on the enemy. Though, alternatively, if the enemy doesn't actually know you're there in the first place, coming upon an unsuspecting enemy can be a decent time to try and land an ult on their head. Combo this with a well-positioned and timed nade that will explode right after the ult goes off, and you'll either immediately fry them, or at least take a huge amount of their health right after. Regardless of what happens exactly, even if you don't finish off the enemy, they'll be forced to run away or just move close to their team where your grenade will become even more powerful. Though, this may change a bit in a situation where the enemy is a duo. There, you'll want to slow things down more and assume you can't hard engage even when landing a good nade stun. You can still burn them down over time, but aren't likely to outright win against them. But that's okay because you're fighting 1v2, and so you're just taking more resources from the enemy than they're taking from you. Now for the alternate situation of Ghost fighting grouped up enemies, or if the enemies he was fighting backed up into a group, he gets much more powerful. Just as before, Ghost still wants to fish for nades. Sure, he can poke some damage on lined up enemies with his laser, or maybe sneak a good ult in. Maybe even one that manipulates enemies into an easy nade. But the nade is his priority no matter what. So while Ghost shouldn't be hard aggroing into the team just because, he needs to position so that he can certainly land a good grenade when it's available. Then, he should watch very carefully for at least 2 enemies to enter prime locations where a nade could knock them back into a wall for a stun. Even better if you can position the nade to knock enemies forward into your team's range, or into your own team's AoE abilities. Communicate your strategy and timing to your team before you nade, and your team can easily follow up on it. Then you can slide into primary fire it, adjusting your aggression depending on how many enemies you hit, while also thinking about how much cooldown reduction you got on the nade and therefore how long until your next one is available. While it usually won't be the best option in this situation, your laser and ult may present themselves as the correct options for the highest damage output after landing a good nade instead of your primary fire. This may be the case in situations such as if the enemy has limited areas to escape to, or needs to move through a choke or corridor to get out, so consider these also after landing a grenade. Playing Ghost won't always be as easy as just toss nade and win though, so you need to consider how aggressively your base positioning can be. Aim to stay just out of the enemy's specific range, and if they outrange you, then only peek to throw the grenade. Ghost gameplay is extremely dependent and empowered based on the obstacles around you, so it's extremely important to think about them. This means you should constantly think about how you can use your grenade to manipulate the enemy as a group, or as individuals if they choose to contest or aggro onto you. This is especially important against highly mobile enemies. Try to think one step ahead of them and plan your escape location and how you can throw your own grenade to counter their dive onto you, or also their dive onto your full team. Though against a solo, it's often just as simple as tossing it at something close behind you and then standing in the blast. Against a group diving your team, it can often be difficult to get the grenade where it'll cone blast them into danger or a stun. The issue is that it can be hard to actually correctly position your grenade if you aren't positioned close to your team when they are dove. For example, the enemy may tank the grenade directly because you cast it from behind them trying to land it near your team, so you'll likely only stun one single enemy, which likely won't be enough to protect your team. So position less aggressively in situations like this where you can guarantee you can land a grenade on top of your own team, or to where they're going to kite backward to.